Tunde pulled the handle, but the door would not move. It felt like something on the other side was holding it shut. He pulled harder. Still nothing. "Why isn't it opening?" he cried. The old woman looked at the clock again. 12:58 a.m. Her face became pale. "The house is trying to keep you," she said. The shadows began sliding across the floor toward them. Long black hands stretching closer and closer. Tunde's heart pounded in his chest. "I'm not staying here," he shouted. He pushed the door with all his strength. Nothing. The shadows were only a few feet away now. The whispers turned into angry voices. "You cannot leave." In the quiet town of Okemara, people believed in many strange things. They believed the forest had spirits. They believed the river carried the voices of the dead. And most importantly, they believed there was a road that should never be walked at night. The villagers called it Midnight Road. During the day, Midnight Road looked harmless. Just a narrow path surrounded by tall grass and old trees. Farmers sometimes used it to shorten their journey to the next village. Children even played football nearby in the afternoon. But once the sun began to set, something changed. The air around the road became colder. The wind stopped blowing. Even the birds refused to sit on the trees along that path. By the time night fell, the road would become completely empty. No one passed there, not even the bravest hunters, because according to the stories told for generations, a house appears there every night at exactly midnight. A house that does not exist during the day. A house that was never built by any human. And a house that no one should ever enter. For many years, the villagers avoided the road completely. But not everyone believed the story. Especially Tunde. Tunde was 26 years old and had just returned from Lagos after spending 5 years working in the city. Unlike most villagers, he did not grow up believing in old superstitions. To him, every story needed proof. And the story of the Midnight House sounded ridiculous. One evening, Tunde sat outside a small roadside bar with a few local men drinking palm wine. The moon was slowly rising in the sky. One of the older men, Papa Jide, began telling a story. "Young people these days don't listen," the old man said slowly, shaking his head. "In my father's time, people respected Midnight Road." One of the younger men laughed. "Papa Jide, you and these ghost stories again." But the old man did not smile. "This is not a story," he said quietly. "This is a warning." The table became silent. Tunde leaned back in his chair and chuckled. "So what exactly happens there?" he asked. Papa Jide looked directly at him. "At midnight, a house appears." Tunde raised an eyebrow. "A house?" "Yes. From where?" "No one knows, and people believe that." The old man nodded slowly. "Anyone who enters that house will never be the same again." Tunde laughed loudly. "So you mean a house just appears out of nowhere every night?" "Yes, and disappears again." "Yes." Tunde shook his head. "That sounds like something people say just to scare children." A few of the men at the table exchanged uneasy looks. Papa Jide leaned forward. "Listen carefully, young man. My cousin entered that house 20 years ago." Tunde stopped smiling. "And what happened to him?" he asked. The old man looked away toward the dark road in the distance. "When he came back, he was not the same person." Tunde frowned. "What do you mean?" "He stopped talking. He stopped sleeping. He kept saying something was calling him. The wind moved softly through the trees. "He died 3 weeks later." Silence filled the table. But Tunde still refused to believe it. He stood up and stretched his arms. "Old village stories," he said. "I'm going to that road tonight." One of the younger men quickly shook his head. "That is not funny. I'm serious," Tunde replied. "If a house really appears there, I want to see it." Papa Jide suddenly grabbed his wrist. His hand was cold. "Do not go there," the old man said firmly. Tunde gently pulled his hand away. "I'll be fine." Then he smiled. Tomorrow I'll come back and tell you all that nothing happened. The men at the table did not laugh. Later that night, the village became quiet. Most houses had turned off their lanterns. Dogs slept in front of wooden doors. The moon hung high in the sky. And Tunde walked alone toward Midnight Road. He carried a flashlight and his phone. The forest around the road looked darker than usual. Every step he took made the dry leaves crunch beneath his feet. He checked the time on his phone. 11:42 p.m. Still early. He continued walking deeper along the path. The trees on both sides grew taller and thicker. Soon, the village lights disappeared behind him. Now he stood in a large open field. According to the stories, this was the exact place where the house appeared. But the field was empty. Just grass moving slowly in the night breeze. Tunde laughed quietly. Of course, he said to himself. Nothing here. He sat on a large stone and waited. Minutes passed. The silence was strange. No insects. No birds. No wind. Just stillness. He checked his phone again. 11:58 p.m. Almost midnight, he murmured. He stood up and looked around. Still nothing. Then his phone screen changed. 11:59 p.m. Suddenly, the wind stopped. Completely. The air felt colder. Much colder. Tunde frowned. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. The ground beneath his feet vibrated slightly. He stepped back. What was that? Then his phone changed again. 12 a.m. At that exact moment, something impossible happened. Right in front of him, the empty field began to change. The air twisted like heat waves. Dark shapes slowly formed from the darkness itself. Walls, windows, a roof. Tunde's eyes widened in shock. Within seconds, a large ancient house appeared where nothing had been before. The building looked old, very old. The wood was dark and cracked. The windows were dusty, and a faint yellow light glowed from inside. Tunde felt his heart beating faster. This can't be real, he whispered. The house stood silently in the middle of the field, as if it had always been there. Then suddenly, the front door slowly creaked open. Creak! Tunde froze. Cold air rushed out from the darkness inside the house. And then he heard something. A voice. Soft, weak, but very clear. Come inside. Tunde's blood ran cold. He looked around quickly. There was no one else there. The voice came again. Come inside. The door opened wider, and darkness waited inside. Tunde stood there, staring at the house. His mind told him to run, but his curiosity whispered something else. And slowly, without realizing it, he took one step toward the door. Tunde stood in front of the open door. The old house towered over him like a silent giant. The wind outside had completely stopped. Everything around him felt frozen in time. The door creaked again slowly, as if inviting him. Creak! Inside the house, darkness filled the hallway. The faint yellow light he saw earlier now flickered weakly, like an old lantern struggling to stay alive. Tunde swallowed hard. His heart was beating faster than before. He remembered what Papa Jide had said earlier that night. Anyone who enters that house will never be the same again. For a moment, Tunde considered turning around and leaving. But then he laughed nervously. This is probably some abandoned building, he muttered. Maybe someone is playing tricks. He lifted his flashlight and stepped closer. The wooden steps leading to the entrance looked worn and cracked. Each step groaned loudly as he climbed. Creak! Creak! The door was now right in front of him. Cold air rushed from inside, brushing against his face. It smelled like dust, and something older, something forgotten. Tunde shined his flashlight into the house. The beam of light revealed a long hallway. The floor was made of dark wood. Cobwebs filled the corners. Old paintings hung on the walls. The strange thing was, the house did not look broken. It looked preserved, as if someone had been taking care of it for many years. But no one could possibly live here, because during the day, this house did not exist. Tunde hesitated. Then he stepped inside. The moment his foot crossed the doorway, the door slammed shut behind him. Bang! Tunde jumped in shock. He quickly turned around and grabbed the handle. But the door would not open. He pulled harder. Nothing. Okay. That's not funny, he said nervously. He tried again. Still nothing. It was as if the door had been locked from the outside. Or worse, as if the house itself refused to let him leave. Tunde took a deep breath and forced himself to stay calm. It's just a door, he said. I'll find another way out. He turned back toward the hallway. The inside of the house was colder than outside. The floor creaked beneath his feet as he walked slowly forward. Creak, creak. His flashlight beam moved across the walls. That was when he noticed something strange. The paintings. Every painting showed a person. Men, women, even children. Each one looked serious, almost frightened. Their eyes seemed unusually detailed. Too detailed. Almost like they were watching him. Tunde stopped in front of one painting. It showed a young woman wearing old-fashioned clothes. Her expression looked sad. He leaned closer to examine it. Then suddenly, bang! A loud noise echoed from upstairs. Tunde froze. The sound was clearly footsteps. Heavy footsteps. Walking slowly across the floor above him. Step, step, step. Tunde's chest tightened. That's impossible, he whispered. He knew for certain he entered the house alone. Yet someone was clearly upstairs. The footsteps continued. Step, step, step. Then suddenly they stopped. Complete silence returned. Tunde raised his flashlight toward the staircase at the end of the hallway. The staircase curved upward into darkness. He stared at it for a long moment. Then his flashlight flickered. Once, twice, then it went completely off. The house was swallowed by darkness. Tunde pressed the flashlight repeatedly. Nothing. Great, he muttered. Now the only light in the house came from the faint yellow glow somewhere, deeper in the building. The darkness felt thick, almost alive. Then something strange happened. Tunde heard breathing. Not his own breathing. Someone else's. Slow, close, right behind him. His body went stiff. He slowly turned around. But the hallway behind him was empty. No one there. Then a whisper floated through the darkness. Soft, cold, right next to his ear. You should not have come here. Tunde spun around again. Still no one. His heart began pounding violently. Who's there? He shouted. No answer. Just silence. Then suddenly, the yellow light at the end of the hallway grew brighter. Tunde slowly walked toward it. Each step felt heavier than the last. When he finally reached the light, he discovered where it came from. An old lantern sat on a small wooden table. But what truly shocked him was the wall above the table. There was a new painting hanging there. A painting that had not been there before. Tunde lifted the lantern and stepped closer. His hands began to shake, because the person in the painting looked very familiar. The face, the clothes, the expression. It was him. The painting showed Tunde standing in the same hallway, looking terrified. And beneath the painting, a small metal plate had been attached. Written on it were 3 chilling words. The new visitor. Tunde's breath stopped. How is that possible? He whispered. But the house did not answer. Instead, upstairs, the footsteps began again. Step, step, step. And this time, they were coming down the stairs. The footsteps were coming down the stairs. Slow, heavy, Step, step, step. Tunde stood frozen in the hallway, holding the lantern with shaking hands. The light flickered weakly, casting long shadows on the walls. His mind raced with fear. Someone or something was inside this house with him. But that made no sense. The house had appeared out of nowhere. He had watched it happen. No one could have entered before him. Yet the footsteps continued. Step, step, step. They were almost at the bottom of the staircase. Tunde slowly backed away. His breathing became louder and faster. Who's there? He called out again. His voice echoed through the hallway. For a moment, everything went silent. Then a figure appeared at the top of the staircase. At first, Tunde could only see a shadow. The lantern light did not reach that far. The figure slowly stepped forward. Step, step, step. When the light finally reached the face, Tunde gasped. It was an old woman. Her hair was long and grey. Her skin looked pale, almost like she had not seen sunlight in many years. She wore a faded white dress that looked very old. But the strangest thing about her was her eyes. They looked tired. Not evil. Just tired. The woman stopped halfway down the stairs and stared at Tunde. You shouldn't be here, she said softly. Her voice sounded weak, like someone who had not spoken in a long time. Tunde took another step back. Who are you? He asked. The woman slowly walked down the rest of the stairs. The wooden steps creaked beneath her feet. When she reached the hallway, she looked around the house with sadness. I asked that question many years ago, she said quietly. Tunde frowned. What do you mean? The woman looked at him again. I entered this house the same way you did. Tunde felt a cold wave run through his body. You mean... you were trapped here too? She nodded slowly. 32 years. Tunde's eyes widened. 32 years? The woman looked toward the walls, toward the paintings. You saw them, didn't you? Tunde slowly nodded. The portraits. They are not paintings, the woman said. They are prisoners. Tunde stared at her in confusion. What do you mean? The woman walked toward one of the portraits. It showed a young man wearing old clothes. His face looked frozen in fear. He came here in 1987, she said. He tried to escape. Her finger touched the frame of the painting. But the house kept him. Tunde's throat went dry. You're saying... all these people... Yes, the woman whispered. They entered the house at midnight, and they never truly left. Tunde looked around the hallway again. Now the paintings felt different. The faces looked more real than before. Some looked terrified. Some looked angry. And some looked like they were silently begging for help. How is this possible? Tunde asked. The woman slowly walked toward the lantern. This house is not normal, she said. It is alive. Tunde's heart skipped a beat. It feeds on curiosity. Every night at midnight it appears, waiting for someone to enter. Tunde suddenly remembered the whisper he heard outside. Come inside. The moment you step inside, the woman continued, the house begins choosing where you belong. Tunde looked toward the painting of himself again. The new visitor. Fear gripped his chest. Is there a way to escape? He asked quickly. The woman looked toward an old clock hanging on the wall. The clock ticked loudly in the silence. Tick, tick, tick. The time read 12:46 a.m. Her expression became serious. Yes, she said. But there is not much time. Tunde stepped closer. How? The woman pointed toward a dark hallway behind the staircase. At the back of the house there is a door. That door only opens before 1 o'clock. Tunde felt a spark of hope. If we leave before 1, we escape. The woman nodded slowly. Yes, but once the clock reaches 1. Her voice grew quieter. The house closes forever. Suddenly the entire building shook. Boom! The walls trembled. The lantern light flickered violently. Tunde looked around in fear. What was that? The woman's eyes filled with dread. It heard us. The floor creaked loudly. The paintings on the wall began rattling. Some of the faces inside them looked like they were moving. Whispers filled the air. Hundreds of voices speaking at once. Stay. Don't leave. You belong here. The woman grabbed Tunde's arm. We must go now. They began running toward the back hallway. But as they passed the portraits, something terrifying happened. One of the hands inside a painting slowly pressed against the glass from the inside, like someone trapped behind a window. Then another painting moved. And another. The trapped faces were waking up. And the whispers grew louder. Stay with us. Tunde's heart pounded violently as they ran through the dark hallway. The house groaned angrily around them, like a monster waking from sleep. Behind them, something began chasing them through the darkness. The whispers behind them grew louder. Stay. Don't leave. You belong here. Tunde and the old woman ran through the narrow hallway as fast as they could. The house groaned like a living creature waking from sleep. The walls creaked. The floor shook beneath their feet. Behind them, something was moving through the darkness. Not footsteps. Something heavier. Something crawling across the wooden floor. Tunde did not dare to turn around. Keep running, the old woman shouted. The lantern light shook wildly in her hand as they rushed down the corridor. Finally, they reached the end of the hallway. There it was. A single wooden door. Old, cracked, but glowing faintly around its edges. Tunde felt hope rush through him. That must be the exit, he said. The old woman nodded quickly. Yes, but we must hurry. Tunde looked at the clock hanging above the door. The hands ticked loudly. 12:56 a.m. Only 4 minutes left. He rushed toward the door and grabbed the handle. But before he could pull it open, a loud crash exploded behind them. Boom! The entire hallway shook violently. Tunde turned around. His heart nearly stopped. The darkness at the end of the hallway was moving. Shadows were crawling along the walls, twisting, stretching, forming shapes that looked almost human. The whispers had become screams. Don't leave. Stay with you. The paintings along the hallway began shaking violently. The trapped faces inside them looked alive now. Some were crying. Some were screaming. Some were pounding against the inside of the frames. The old woman grabbed Tunde's arm. Open the door, she shouted. Tunde pulled the handle. Tunde pulled the handle. But the door would not move. It felt like something on the other side was holding it shut. He pulled harder. Still nothing. Why isn't it opening? He cried. The old woman looked at the clock again. 12:58 a.m. Her face became pale. The house is trying to keep you, she said. The shadows began sliding across the floor toward them. Long black hands stretching closer and closer. Tunde's heart pounded in his chest. I'm not staying here, he shouted. He pushed the door with all his strength. Nothing. The shadows were only a few feet away now. The whispers turned into angry voices. You cannot leave. The old woman suddenly stepped forward. She raised the lantern high above her head. Tunde, she shouted. When I tell you, push the door again. He nodded desperately. What are you going to do? She did not answer. Instead, she turned toward the approaching shadows. Her eyes were filled with determination. For the first time, she looked strong. Not tired. Not weak. Strong. She lifted the lantern and threw it into the darkness. The lantern smashed against the floor. Crash! The flame burst across the wooden boards. Fire exploded across the hallway. The shadows shrieked loudly. A terrible, inhuman scream filled the house. The darkness pulled back violently. Now, the old woman shouted. Tunde grabbed the handle and pushed with all his strength. The door suddenly burst open. Cold night air rushed inside. Bright moonlight flooded the hallway. Tunde turned to the woman. "Come with me," he shouted. But she was not moving. She stood calmly in the burning hallway. The shadows were already beginning to return around her. Her eyes looked peaceful. "I cannot leave," she said softly. Tunde shook his head. "Yes, you can. Come." She smiled sadly. "I entered this house 32 years ago. This place already owns my soul." The fire spread across the floor. The shadows screamed louder. The house shook violently. The clock above the door ticked louder. 12:59 a.m. The old woman looked at him one last time. "Go. Warn people. Tell them the house is real." Tunde's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," he said. Then he stepped through the door and ran into the field. The moment his feet touched the grass, the house vanished. Gone. Completely. The door. The walls. The fire. Everything disappeared like smoke in the wind. Tunde fell to his knees in the empty field, breathing heavily. The moon shone quietly above him. The place where the house stood was now just grass and dirt. Nothing else. No sign that the building had ever existed. Slowly, Tunde stood up. His body was still shaking. He looked at his hands. And that was when he noticed something strange. A small black mark had appeared on his palm. A mark shaped like a tiny door. He frowned. Then suddenly, deep inside his mind, he heard a faint whisper. Soft, cold, and very familiar. "Midnight is coming again." Tunde slowly looked back at the empty field. Fear crept through his chest, because he now understood something terrifying. The house had not chosen him as a prisoner. It had chosen him as the next witness, and somewhere in the darkness of the night, waiting for the next curious visitor, the house would appear again, at midnight. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like and share so you don't miss our next stories.